go through all the chapters and then look at some of the items, all at once, or no? Do it by chapter? Let's do the first 3 chapters together, then we'll separate Pavlov and Guthrie. But by the way, you know, a lot of this material in this book was focused on Pavlov and a little bit on Guthrie. I try to give sort of an equal representation of the different chapters, just so you know. But go back to chapter 1. What do you need to know in this? Oh, it's just everything. No. You should have an idea about, you know, for a definition of psychology. And the one that's probably important for you is on page 1. It's Kimball. Permanent change, relatively permanent change of behavior or behavior potentiality. It results from experience. And on page 6, especially that one over there, sort of an extension of that on page 6. And italics. There's a photograph of Gregory Kimball. But anyway, on page 6, page 1 and page 6, you can get your definition for learning there in those 2 places. Now, moving on, you should know what an intervening variable is on page 3. Independent, dependent, and intervening variables. And for sure, on page 4, you should know something about sensitization and habituation to non-associative forms of learning. Sensitization and habituation. Now there's a whole section here on old Conrad Lorenz. Remember him walking around and with which that section there introduces the concept of instinct. And I told you why we don't like the word instinct in psychology, because it was real popular for a while there for people to invent instincts without actually explaining the behavior. So reflexes and instincts, but then Conrad Lorenz introduces this idea of imprinting in critical periods. You should know what those are. And I also mentioned a word we use sometimes as a substitute for instinct is fixed action pattern. Another term that you should be familiar with is species-specific behavior. Species-specific behavior, fixed action patterns, that's the way we think about instinct with humans. We still use the word instinct to refer to other organisms, but with humans, fixed action patterns, species-specific behavior. Those words are maybe more descriptive, fixed action patterns and species-specific behavior. And what releases a fixed action pattern? Assigned stimulus. Assigned stimuli. So you should know what assigned stimulus is. I believe they discuss assigned stimuli here. I sure hope so. Well, it's not jumping out at me, but assigned stimulus is simply it's a trigger, it's a releaser for this complex pattern of behavior. Now, on page 7, they compare different kinds of learning, and on page 7 and then most of page 8, don't worry about that for this first test. We'll get into that in subsequent chapters. But you should know what homeostasis and homeostatic mechanisms are on page 9. Homeostasis. All right, chapter 2. What is science? We talked some about the different characteristics of the scientific endeavor. And but on page 15, really, they sort of get at the crux of the matter. What is a function of scientific theories? Well, I talk about theories on page 14. Theories have a synthesizing function and a heuristic function. They unify and synthesize large amounts of information, and they also stimulate more research. Remember, a good theory is a dynamic one. It's one that can change with as new information comes in. A static theory is a useless theory. It's one that can't accommodate new information, like Freud's theory of the unconscious mind. It is what it is. But what if we have other research that says it isn't? Well, then we just throw it out the window, which is pretty much what we've done. Oh, yeah, you're going to get some Freudian to come in here and start talking to you about the unconscious mind and dreams and interpretation. Please, no science there. The principle of parsimony, page 16, you should know what that is. Occam's razor, Morgan's canon. Principle of parsimony. A good theory is one that is stated in the simplest terms, has the fewest exceptions. Okay, learning experiment. Here we go again with operational definitions, independent, dependent variable. You probably already know that from your research methods class, but you should know what an operational definition is. Independent, dependent variable in an experiment. There's like a grocery list of things on the next few pages that I don't really, I sort of talk about, but not something I'm going to focus on. But with regard to models, there are different models of how science should move forward. And the two you need to know about is the one by Thomas Kuhn and also Karl Popper, pages 22 through 25. Know about Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper. The principle of, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, right, yeah, that would be good to know. What are the differences between Kuhn and Popper, and what are their two approaches? And they're completely different. Remember, Kuhn says that science progresses through a series of revolutions. Popper says that no, it's an accumulation of small bits and facts experiments, and through the process of falsification. And anyway, page 24. That's chapter 2. Let's take a look at chapter 3. Okay. Remember my lecture on the board here in the very beginning? I talked about metaphysics, and I talked about determinism versus free will. You should know what determinism is. All events have determinable causes. Free will, we have something called the will, presumably. But the will is okay. We do have a will. We will things. We do exert our own volition and effort. But it's whether it's free or not, completely capricious. But you should know what determinism is. And then we talked about another metaphysical topic, epistemology. In chapter 3, they begin with epistemology on page 27. The theory of how we come to know things. And they talk about empiricism, nativism, and rationalism. And so you should know what those things are. We did talk about all of that. And we talked about how it fits in with science as a way of knowing things. Science is both empirical and rational. It involves collecting data through our senses, but it also involves logic, deductive and inductive logic, which makes it rational. Plato, you should know something about Plato. And this gang of Pythagoreans. No. The Pythagoreans. But Plato, you recall, was a rationalist. His reminiscence theory of knowledge, we talked about that, and nativism, pages 29. Page 29, Plato. Don't trust your senses. Just remember what you already know. Aristotle, in his laws, or they're sometimes called principles of association, and that's on page 30. His laws of association, and there's 4 of them. You remember that? Similarity, contrast, contiguity, frequency. Now that's starting to set the stage a little bit, certainly, for these theories we just got through talking about. Contiguity, Pavlov and Guthrie. That's why Pavlov and Guthrie are actually in the same section in your textbook, because they're both associationistic theories. I mean, primarily associationistic. The beginning of modern psychology, you should know something about René Descartes and John Locke, pages 32, 33, 34. But when they start launching into some of the other British empiricists, I don't think we went into, did we go into too much detail on the British empiricists? No, okay. But anyway, know something about the beginning of modern psychology from 32 through 34, which includes John Locke. René they start launching into Berkeley and Hume and Kant, etc., then don't worry about that. They're all British empiricists, but we don't need to get into all the details. Did we talk about Franz Joseph Gall and phrenology and the impact it had in psychology, like physiological science? Franz Joseph Gall studying the bumps on your head? I don't think we did. That's too bad. I got a Franz Joseph Gall head in my office. I could have brought it down and we could have. It's much more fun to do it with your friends and family members out. Oh, you have a very pronounced love bump. But your intelligence area is, there's a big old hollow there. It became very popular, you know, it's sort of like a parlor entertainment. People were feeling their heads and seeing how they, because that sets the stage for personality and also physiological sight, that there are certain areas of your head associated with certain kinds of functions. Faculty psychology. You have different faculties. Love, emotion, intelligence, which, as I said, kind of sort of sets the stage for ideas about personality and also ideas about how your brain, you know, that there are different areas of your brain. Anyway, Franz Joseph Gall, don't worry about it. Well, Darwin, I think we did go through some of the basic schools of thought, didn't we? Yeah. So I would say maybe pick it up on page 39 with Darwin, his influence in the schools of thought of psychology. So from page 39, I don't know if I talked about Hermann Ebbinghaus much, but I'd say from 39 and then the schools of thought to the end of the chapter. Yes, from page 39 to the end of the chapter, review that. Let me read you some items from my test pool. I have a little test here. Let me read you some items that are related to those chapters, just so you get an idea. An unlearned response to a specific stimulus exemplifies. An unlearned response to a specific stimulus exemplifies instinct, reflex, sensitization, or conditioned reflex. An unlearned response to a specific stimulus exemplifies instinct, reflex, sensitization, or conditioned reflex. What do you think? An unlearned response to a specific stimulus exemplifies instinct, reflex, sensitization, or conditioned reflex. Hopefully you said reflex. Yeah, it's just a simple reflex. It's not conditioned response or conditioned reflex. A conditioned reflex or a conditioned response is learned. Well, here's one that's so easy. I mean, this is a gimme. There'll be some gimmies on here, of course. According to Kuhn, science progresses by building on the past, gradually and systematically, through the activity called normal science, or through a series of revolutions. According to Kuhn, science progresses by building on the past, gradually and systematically, through an activity called normal science, or through a series of revolutions. What do you think? Yeah, revolutions, I just said so about 3 minutes ago. Maybe 5 minutes ago. Okay, that was an easy one. See if I can find one that stumped the students. Okay, here's one for you. The rapid formation of an attachment between an organism and an environmental object that occurs during a critical period is called modeling, conditioning, imprinting, or learning. See how easy this is? Don't underestimate my test. That's all I got to say for it. Make sure you study stuff. But if you study and you turn on this book, you should do fine. If you blow off the text, well, I come to class, I listen, I'm a genius. Okay. Let's see, well, how about another one there? Here's a good one for you. According to Guthrie, if you want to learn how to fill out tax forms, you should study mathematics. Study any difficult topic and you'll be better able to perform on any number of difficult tasks. Fill out tax forms or all of the above. Correct? You know, that reminds me of filling out tax forms. It's not my favorite thing to do. About once a year I do it, but I always have to relearn so much stuff because you only do it once a year. So it's like all these tasks that we have here at the university. You got to do this thing. Yeah, but you only do it once a year. So I don't commit this stuff to memory. Well, wait a minute. That means it's gradual. Well, no, but that would be like a skill, according to Guthrie. So that's a different thing. I always go to experts for stuff because I figure they're doing it all day long. They're going to be able to do this much quicker than me. I just refuse to sit there and become an expert on all the little menus inside of menus in Microsoft, which I can't stand, okay? I don't want to become an expert on this trivial stuff. I just want to accomplish what I want to accomplish. You know? But the same thing is, if you're a Microsoft PC person and you go to a Mac, you're going to be pulling your hair out. You're going to be going, oh my God, Macintosh, who would ever do this? But it works the other way too, you know. And if you have an iPhone and you ever switch to like Samsung or some other phone, same thing. There's a whole set of learning. You're going to spend all your, oh, well, you'll learn how to do it. If I don't want to become an expert on this platform, I just want to do right or whatever it is you want to do. For Guthrie, reinforcement caused faster learning, strengthening, preservation from unlearning by changing the stimulus situation, or all of the above. For Guthrie, reinforcement caused faster learning, strengthening, preservation from unlearning by changing the stimulus situation, or all of the above. Hopefully you said preservation from unlearning by changing the stimulus situation. It's not all of the above. There's no strengthening involved here. But they sound good, don't they, those other responses? But it's that one. It preserves the response that was last made. Moving on. Chapter 7, the Pavlov. You got to read these questions. That's one thing I would say about these questions on this test. Read them carefully. Pavlov, page 149 in the book. Well, you should know about Pavlov's preparation of the dog in the harness and the fistula. He was interested in what? Cardiac function and digestion initially. But then he noticed the dogs were salivating when their attendants walked in the room, and so that kicked off a whole area known as classical conditioning. Or sometimes, by the way, it's called Pavlovian conditioning. If you ever see Pavlovian conditioning, that's synonymous with classical conditioning. Anyway, on page 152 and 153, that's where they focus right in on all those four different, the whole procedure. Those four different events. That is the unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. So you need to know his theoretical paradigm, and that's on page 152 and also on 153. Then your book launches into a discussion of some of the general phenomena associated with classical conditioning. But by the way, those phenomena, like acquisition, extinction, and so on, they're found in instrumental learning as well. in a different form, but they're still there. So, what you need to know about is acquisition. What is that? The formation of a newly learned response, condition response, is called acquisition. What's the test for classical conditioning? Pair a CS with a US, and when you start seeing the CR occur to the CS, get rid of the US, and then, eliminate the reinforcement. By the way, what is the reinforcement in classical conditioning? The US. What's the relationship between the US and the UR? The unconditioned stimulus and the unconditioned response. It's reflexive. The unconditioned response is a reflex. Oh, so you mean classical conditioning mostly explains learning that involves involuntary, reflexive kinds of responses? Yes. Yeah, okay, so you need to know what extinction is, what spontaneous recovery is, page 153. Extinction, acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery. You should know what higher order conditioning is. All those basic learning phenomena. You should know what a secondary reinforcer, or the difference between a secondary reinforcer and a primary reinforcer. Just keep this in mind. A secondary reinforcer is always a learned reinforcer. CSs become secondary reinforcers. Conditioned stimuli become, all CSs are secondary reinforcers. All CS pluses. And that, in fact, that's the symbol we use to indicate a excitatory conditioned stimulus is CS plus. And CS pluses are secondary reinforcers. In other words, they can be used to reinforce some other response that precedes it. That's higher order conditioning. Stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination on the next 2 pages, you should know what those are. It just says generalization and discrimination, but it's really stimulus generalization and stimulus discrimination. And you should know about backward conditioning. And also, in that same discussion on backward conditioning, page 156, 157, you should know the difference between an appetitive and aversive US. Appetitive and aversive stimuli. Appetitive stimuli would be things like food. An aversive stimulus would be like electric shock, something you want to avoid. Aversive stimuli, those are things you want to avoid. Appetitive stimuli are things you want to obtain. Doesn't have to be food, could be money for that matter. But that's a learned reinforcer. Why is money so powerfully reinforcing? Why is it so powerful over so many of them? Because it's been paired with so many other things that you want. It becomes really powerful. Money will buy you everything. Huh? Oh, no, it won't. Okay. Well, unless it becomes worthless, we'll see in a few weeks. Hey, you can always take solace in this. If the stock market really goes down, it's a buying opportunity. Keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. It's an opportunity for growth, and it's a buying opportunity. Page 157, I have a little discussion of information value with regard to CSs, and you should know why they're discussing that there. What's that got to do with a CS? CSs provide information for the organism. They tell the organism whether something biologically important is coming or not. Now, let's see. Okay, I think you could skip over pages 157. Well, information value, page 157, but then where it starts with major theoretical concepts on 157, you could skip over to page 159, where there begins a discussion on excitatory and Inhibitory conditioning. On page 159, excitatory and inhibitory conditioning. You should know the difference between the two. We didn't talk about Pavlov's brain physiology, so I'm not going to talk about excitatory and inhibitory conditioning. Yes. You should know that what the first and second signal system is for Pavlov, page 161. That is object or first signal system conditioning, and then meaning or symbolic conditioning, second signal system, page 161. Here we go again with that comparing classical and instrumental conditioning on page 162. Just forget about that. Skip over that. You can skip pages 162 and then pick up on 163 with recent research on classical conditioning. And what do you need to know there about CRs are not necessarily little URs? Following page, some of that study by Obrist, but especially by Siegel. On page 164, remember Siegel and the morphine and preparatory responses and so on? Page 164, yes, Siegel. Extinction involves interference, page 165. Well, I said I think I said I don't care if you know what the renewal or reinstatement effect is, but what you do need to know is about context conditioning, page 166, because this is all about context conditioning.
And also 165?
Well, on 165, well, just generally, the idea of extinction involves interference, generally speaking. But I don't care if you remember the procedures for the renewal effect and reinstatement effect. You got enough to keep straight, I think. But context conditioning, an extinction involves interference. Overshadowing and blocking, yeah, you should know that. But on page 167, they talk about condition suppression in the CER. You don't need to know about that. That's just not something you need to know about that. So most of the top of 167 is all about, they spend this whole couple of paragraphs talking about condition suppression and the CER, and don't worry about that. That's what Cannon used with his blocking experiment, but what you need to know is page 168. That figure on 168 should know that. What blocking is, you need to know what blocking is. You don't need to know the exact methodology on the previous page, but you do need to know 168, how blocking comes about. You need to know what overshadowing is also. And that's, but that's an easy idea. Page 166, overshadowing. Overshadowing and blocking. Anyway, I was just thinking about that computer thing, learning new platforms and, and all of that. I guess probably the reason that popped into my mind, speaking of associationism, is because that's the way it works, is that my iPhone, my wife is using my iPhone because hers went on the fridge or something or other, so I got this little Samsung thing in the meantime, so she could use my iPhone. And I'm sitting here now, and I'm hearing all these different sounds. I have no clue what they mean. I'm like, the operator on the other end, namely me, is just like, don't know what it is. Well, maybe it's answer the phone. I don't know how to do that yet. So calls are coming in, I'm sure. I can't even answer them. I don't even know what to do with it. But it makes me feel good. It's a security thing, It's pathetic, these phones and iPads. Now, you know what? That's an area that really needs to be researched right away, because I believe they're having a negative effect on us and our ability to interact socially. At first, I did some research a while back on computers, and how that affected the way we interact with each other socially. And there's some negative effects of that, especially like getting to know people. Getting to know somebody through the internet is not the same thing as sitting there in front of a human being and talking to them. But a lot of that is going on, and I think it has a negative effect I know it has a negative effect. I've actually known personally people who've gotten divorced because their spouse meets somebody on the internet. Oh, it's a nice day. Hey, let's go. We belong to a club. Some kind of, oh, I want to be in that. They go meet him at this club. Next thing you know, oh, honey, by the way, we're getting divorced. I like my little internet buddy better. It has some negative effects. And I think phones and iPads, when people are glued to them constantly, which a lot of people are, they never put those things down. I mean, anyway, there are some initial studies on like the lack of eye contact between family members because everybody's sitting there at home. Never looks up. So that could be a problem, but I think that's an area wide open for research right now. Anyhow, Rescorla-Wagner theory. You should know that equation on page 169 toward the top there. Now, what you need to know is what those little symbols mean there, okay? I'm not going to have you computer or anything, but you need to know what is the point of the Rescorla-Wagner theory. It is a
This
mechanical...
one, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, just asking this one.
That's just that one at the top, yeah. It's a model, a mathematical model to predict classical conditioning learning, okay? And one of the basic premises of the Rescorla-Wagner model is that there's a fixed amount of associative strength in any given learning situation. And it predicts a lot of learning phenomena. It actually draws curves that look like actual learning curves, which means that they understand it pretty well. There have been other mathematical learning models in psychology, but this one is kind of an important one. Seems like there was some, but that idea of a fixed amount of learning available in any given situation, that's a key aspect of their theory. By the way, it also, that theory, and I don't know if I said this, but it's also a very mechanistic theory of how classical conditioning works. It's very mechanistic in that there's this fixed amount of learning, you use up so much, and then this is what happens, and that's that. It doesn't involve things like attention and surprise and all these other sort of not very well-defined terms. But anyway, on the next page, you should know what contingency is versus contiguity. Some more Rescorla stuff. Page 170, contingency, and if you understand that figure on page 171, you understand the concept of contingency. What's important in classical conditioning is that there is a predictive relationship between the CS and the US, a probabilistic relationship between the CS and the US. It's not just that the two occur together closely in time. The one thing, the CS, has to reliably predict the US. If it does, you have a high contingency. It's a probabilistic relationship. Given the CS, what is the probability that a US will occur? That's a probabilistic relationship. Well, the two things just happen to occur together. Oh, that's it? Yeah, that's just strictly contiguity. But a contingency means one thing depends on the other one. Okay, anyhow, so you should know about contingency. Learned helplessness, page 173, Martin Seligman. Remember the dogs pushing the button with their snout? And one group of dogs that had no control over their world learned to become helpless. Even when there's a random presentation of CSs and USs, they still learn something. What did they learn? To be helpless. Yeah, but see, Rescorla in the previous couple of pages said, no, when you got a random presentation of CSs and USs, you don't learn anything. Martin Seligman says, oh, yes, you do. Under a certain set of circumstances, you learn to become helpless. Even when the CS and the US are randomly presented, you still learn to become helpless. Under certain circumstances. All right, finally, these different theoretical accounts of classical conditioning. What did Pavlov say? Contiguity. What does Rescorla say? Contingency. What does McIntosh say? Attention. It depends on whether you're paying attention to the CS. Remember when I turned the lights on and off? Did you learn anything? You said no. I said yes, you did. You stopped paying attention to it. So it would be harder for me to get you to salivate to the light if I presented food after Surprisingness, Leon Cannon, remember? Well, he was going to be learning to the extent that you're surprised by the U.S. Blocking, surprisingness. Okay. You should know about latent inhibition on page 177, and that's what I just got through saying, the CS pre-exposure effect or latent inhibition. Page 177. By the way, McIntosh's theory with attention can explain that latent inhibition. Oh, you stop paying attention to it. What about Rescorla? No, there was no US. But there was a degradation in learning, even though there was no US. Well, how can there be any associative strength available? I mean, how can that be? Because there was no US. Well, McIntosh says you stop paying attention to that. Like, don't worry about superconditioning on page 178. You need to know a little something about Robert Bowles and his biological interpretation of learning species-specific reactions, page 178, Robert Bowles. Now, he's coming at it from the biology side of things, you know. Oh, your biology has something to do with whether you can learn things or not? Yes. And then right on the heels of that, they launch into the Garcia effect. Biological influences in learning. That's Bowles, that's Garcia. Well, how does biology affect it? Well, because of your biology, you can learn some things easier than others. Like mammals make a strong association between being sick and the last thing they ate. Can there be a long time interval between the CS and the US? Yes, with conditioned taste aversion learning. You can get sick 2 hours after you ate something. You're still going to make that connection. Well, wait a minute. I thought you said, Dr. Moon, it was a half a second was the optimal time interval. Yeah, except with taste aversion learning. You can get, and by the way, it can go as long as 24 hours, but not generally speaking, under some circumstances. But it could go up to 6 or 8 hours and you still don't make a connection. It depends. It depends on the stimuli, it depends on how sick you were, it depends on a lot of things like that. It depends on how distinctive the flavor was, how strong the CS is, and how strong the US is. I don't like thinking about examples of that because then it dredges up these old connections. It's like, no, not before I eat dinner tonight. I'm not going to be thinking about taste aversion, learning examples. Anyway, the Garcia effect, that's what that is. John Watson, Little Albert, Rosalind Rayner, poor Albert. They created a phobia in Albert, or at least this conditioned fear, a classically conditioned emotional response. You should know about Mary Trevor Jones and Peter and eliminating fears on page 182 and 83. 182 and 183, Mary Trevor Jones, Little Peter. Now you should know how you can get rid of these phobic reactions, and because they're based on classical conditioning and the work of Watson, there are different methods, which we already went through. I'm not going to go through them again, but counter-conditioning, flooding, and systematic desensitization by Wolfe. All right. Page 186, applications to medicine. You should be familiar with Adder and Cohen's classically conditioned immunosuppression. Page 186, Adder and Cohen's research on classically conditioned immunosuppression, and how you can both ratchet up your immune system and suppress it, and that can be learned. So you can literally learn to become sick, and you can also learn to become well, but in a classical conditioning sense. But as I said, don't confuse this with if you're sick, just sit there and put a happy smile on your face and you're going to get better. No. Because there was a guy, there was actually a journalist once that was sick and spent a lot of time in the hospital. And what he did was he watched old movies I think it was maybe the Marx Brothers, watched movies all the time. That's all he did, and then he got better. So then I'm trying to think of his name now. He's a publisher, I think. And so then for a while he was going, oh, you can laugh yourself to good health. No. You can watch a lot of old movies and laugh at them, but I'm talking about classical conditioning of the immune system. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about sitting there, read a lot of jokes and laugh and you'll be feeling better. I mean, you might feel better, but you may not get better. You might get well. All right, that takes care of Pavlov. Guthrie, we just went over again, guys. I'm not going to go through that, but I will read you some more items. Any questions before I read you some more items? Yeah, of course not, because you're going to start reading this tomorrow. No, I'm sure you've been reading it already. I hope you have been. All right, let's see what we got here. Which of the following becomes a secondary reinforcer in classical conditioning? Which of the following becomes a secondary reinforcer in classical conditioning? The US, the CS, the UR, or the CR? Which of the following becomes a secondary reinforcer in classical conditioning? The US, the CS, the UR, or the CR?
CS.
Yeah, hopefully you said the CS becomes a secondary reinforcer. A learned reinforcer. Well, here's a gimme for you. For Pavlov, US stands for unconscious processes, is an unconditioned situation, is a reflex eliciting stimulus, stands for uncontrolled sample, or none of the above. I'll just read it again in case you want to say something different. For Pavlov, US, A stands for unconscious processes, is an unconditioned situation, is a reflex eliciting stimulus, stands for uncontrolled sample, or none of the above. I don't hear so many none of the aboves anymore, right? But people are like, it's a trick question. Maybe I shouldn't tell you. Maybe you just let you figure that one out. All right, what do you think? What stands for unconscious processes? Raise your hand if you believe that one. Is the correct answer. Nobody. Okay, very good. Is an unconditioned situation. This is U.S. One hand, maybe two hands. The third one is a reflex eliciting stimulus. 6 or 7 hands. D stands for uncontrolled sample. Any hands on that one? No? Okay, good. At least you got that one eliminated. And E, none of the above. Anybody? God, there were like 8 people that said none of the above at first. It's a reflex eliciting stimulus. I don't see the word unconditioned stimulus. Yeah, but it is a reflex eliciting stimulus. That's why I say read these questions carefully. Because I know what would happen on a question like that. You'd read through it quickly and go, oh, none of the above. There's no unconditioned stimulus there. Think, read and think on these questions. Let's get another one going. In John Watson's experiment with little Albert, what was the unconditioned stimulus? The white rat, the loud noise, fear, John Watson, or none of the above? In John Watson's experiment with little Albert, what was the unconditioned stimulus? The white rat, the loud noise, fear, John Watson, or none of the above? Hopefully you said the loud noise. That was the unconditioned stimulus that caused the fear. kind of mentioned some Guthrie items, didn't they? Or no? Well, okay, let's see. According to Cammon, conditioning continues as long as A, a CS is paired with the US, B, the US will support additional conditioning, C, the organism attends to the US, and D, the organism is surprised by the occurrence of the US. According to Cammon, conditioning continues as long as a CS is paired with the US will support additional conditioning, the organism attends to the US, or the organism is surprised by the occurrence of the US. Remember Cammon? Remember the word surprisingness. Cammon, surprisingness. It was the last alternative. The organism is surprised by the occurrence of the US. That's enough items. I think you get the idea. You understand the kind of items that will be on there. Maybe some of those will be on there, maybe they won't. I just need to go back and put together a test, but you get the idea. All right, any questions? See you next Monday at 4:30 for your test.